Hello friends, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Leading the Early Years for the Future. I'm your host, Amie Fabry, and today I have the absolute joy of speaking with the incredible Lael Stone. Lael is a speaker, author, and educator, and her passion is supporting parents to understand their children, helping adults to process their own childhood trauma, and creating education systems that value emotional awareness. Lael, thank you so much for the important work that you do, and thank you for joining me today.
I'm really happy to be here. Thanks, Amie.
My first question that I ask every guest on the podcast is, what's your hidden talent? Do you have something that you either love to do, that lights you up, brings you joy, that perhaps sits outside of your work, or it may be connected to your work?
Oh, that is a really good question. And I don't know. I feel like you'd have to ask my children and my husband because I don't know. I think there's I feel like my hidden talent is I'm able to see into people and help them see what blocks them. Like I feel like, I don't know, that's kind of connected to my work, but I've always been really good ever since I was little, just listening to people and then being really curious about their stories and then just seeing where the stories and imprints and patterns turn up for them. It's really easy for me. I'm just like, oh yeah, it's a bit like a map that just kind of makes sense to me. So I don't know. I don't know whether it's that. Short of that, I don't know if it's definitely not cooking. I mean, I write a lot, but that's often for work. So I wonder if it's just understanding humans, that is what it comes really naturally to me. And I think that's what I love doing.
What an amazing skill to have. And, you can see why you do the work that you do, which I want to dive into. I first heard about you and your book and your work when I was listening a couple of years ago to one of the Imperfects podcasts. And what really struck me, I think, as an early childhood educator was first and foremost the way you were talking about children. I was just like, wow, who is this amazing woman? Because this was just like a breath of fresh air, hearing the way you describe children, as equals to us. And the wisdom that you were offering to parents was just so beautiful and so human-centered. And then, of course, I learned about your book, which I read, and I love that as a parent, but also as an educator. And I was also blown away because you talked about the school that you started. It was just such an incredible interview. If anyone hasn't heard it before, I really encourage you to go back and listen. And there's quite a few podcast episodes that you have recorded with the Imperfects. But Lael, can you please tell us about the work that you do? It is a little multifaceted, I think, but I would love to hear more about the work that you do.
Thank you. These days, I spend a lot of time traveling around the country talking. So I do a lot of public speaking, talking to parents or educators really around helping us understand children more, and also understanding ourselves. I am still on the board of my beautiful school, which is called Woodline Primary, which is here in Victoria. And I spent 3 years creating the school and then was kind of very hands-on for the first few years. And we're just going into our 5th year now. So I've pulled back a little bit from school, doesn't really need me anymore. And, I've got an amazing team there who are doing incredible work. And it's beautiful to see that just flourish and find its feet. But I actually now consult with other people that want to build schools. So not many people do build schools because it's a very hard thing to do. And, you need a lot of money, you need a lot of time, you need a lot of grit and resilience to do it. It's not an easy thing, but I do spend some time consulting with others to kind of help them not make the same mistakes that we made. So that is pretty beautiful to watch that kind of come to fruition. I also work a lot with adults these days, really on understanding their own imprints and stories and why they respond and behave the way they do. So I do that with educators, but also just with parents as well, because so much of, I think, for many years, we think the challenges with parenting are all around how do I get my child to put their shoes on and why won't they listen, and is all about behavior, but it's actually all about how we respond and the environment that we create for children. And so I've found that a lot of my work is helping adults understand their own stories so they can be more aware and conscious of how they turn up for their children. So I do that online with courses and mentorships and those kind of things. And I've just finished writing my second book, which is coming out next year, which is exciting, which is a book for anybody really, and it's about understanding more of our own stories, again, to look at why we do what we do in the world and how we turn up and the things that we often bump up against and why. So that's coming out soon. What else do I do? I'm a mum, probably most importantly. I have three beautiful children, but they're adults now. They're like 24, 21 and nearly 17. So I don't have to, my mum hat, I don't wear it as much anymore. It's just nice. It's funny. I often say all three of my kids are at home at the moment, living at home, and it's like living in a share house. It's pretty fun. So it doesn't really require much parenting, but it's nice just to spend beautiful time with them, hanging out with them, because I know they're all about to fly off soon. I think that's kind of all I do. I often get flustered sometimes when I'm like, oh, I've done this, I've done that. And I think, what else do I do? No, that's probably it. That's enough.
That's pretty impressive. I think, it is worth mentioning the mum hat. I know I learned so much more about children having my own children.
Yeah.
Then I thought I knew a lot when I was an educator, and then I had children. I was like, whoa, there's so much more that goes on for our little people. Can you tell me more about the work you're now doing? You said it's more focused on the adults, so families, parents, educators, and it's that kind of inner work. How do we as the grown-ups show up and respond to children, as opposed to focusing on the children who, sometimes unfortunately are still seen as they're the ones with the problem?
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about that work, and why is that so important?
Yeah. Well, I think the reality is we were all children once. We've all been parented. And whether we are aware of it or not, often the way we respond to children is either the way we were raised, or we often swing so far in the opposite direction because it didn't feel good in the way we were raised. And we sometimes overshoot, so if we perhaps grew up in an environment where, there was a lot of authoritarian power over parenting, we got yelled at a lot, you had to be good all the time, you never really got to speak or express how you felt. And that may have felt very disempowering for you as a human growing up. And you kind of swear, when I have kids, I'll never do it that way. And because that has often felt very painful for you, you may be like, I'm never going to yell at my kids, and I'm never going to make them feel the way I did. But you may then kind of become very permissive and never set any boundaries. And that equally doesn't serve children as well. We need this beautiful balance of love and connection and attentiveness and attunement. And equally, we need beautiful, loving boundaries where kids can push up against as well, and be able to hold that and also take care of our own needs as adults. So I think one of the things is that we often end up parenting in ways that were done to us unconsciously, or we shoot too far in the other direction. And I think whenever adults would come to me, whether it was teachers or whether it was parents, and they're just drives me mad because my child talks back, or they're so disrespectful, or they just won't do what I ask them to do, or why won't they sleep, or whatever it is. And the reaction that the adult's having, I was like, there's something here for you, because in an ideal world, yes, we all get stressed as parents because parenting is tough, right? And we get tired, and if we don't meet our own needs and we're juggling all the balls, we often get snappy because we just haven't got our needs met. But if we are reacting a lot and our reactions are pretty big, then I always say there's something there for us to explore. There's something to look into. What is it that comes up for you when your child doesn't listen? What does it make you feel? Does that remind you of something? Is this a familiar feeling in your life? And I think it's a beautiful invitation to lean into what is my part within this story here. Because as I say to adults all the time, if you are having a reaction, it is about you. It is never a child's job to be emotionally responsible for an adult. They're a child. They are learning how the world works, right? And we are adults with a fully functioning prefrontal cortex and 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years of being on this planet who should know better. But when we react and we get really fired up and we get really triggered, we often want to blame it on the child for not doing what we want them to do. Yet our mastery is around being able to pause and being able to connect to within ourselves, to be like, all right, there's something going on here. What is this beautiful little child in front of me needing? What am I not seeing here? If I had to decode what was happening here, if I was to look behind the behavior, what would I see? Well, I would see a little person that has had a massive day at care, and I've just got home and picked them up, and they've been without me all day, and that feels really big for them and their nervous system. And what they need is probably lots of connection and cuddles, and they need to diffuse all the tension sitting in their body. So they maybe will have a meltdown when I cut their sandwich the wrong way, or give their sister more ice cream or whatever it is. And it doesn't mean they're bad or wrong. It means they're just going, life feels really big for me. And our job as adults is to be curious of that, is to hold our center enough to be able to decipher what this little person is doing in front of us. Yet I think, and this is where I just have so much compassion for us as humans, I think because we are stressed right now, and I think because we have all the balls in the air, and I think because we are in this really fast-paced life, then what often happens is we lose our center and we don't have the ability to take a breath and go, gee, I wonder what's going on. We just actually become reactive. And I also think too, if we grew up in environments where, there was trauma, or there was a lot of aggression, there was a lot of anger, there was, even if we were just ignored when we got upset, those feelings are going to live still inside us if we haven't processed them. And then when you have children, it's like the ultimate mirror to all your crap, because the kids just stand up in front of you and go, hey, mom, hey, dad, see that there's this little bit here. And so I'm just going to behave in a way that's going to activate that, because actually what I really need you to do is look at it and deal with it and process it so you don't project it onto me. So our kids are like the best barometers ever for our emotional awareness and emotional growth. And it's our job to be curious, to be like, wow, how am I responding here? And what's that about for me?
There's so much in there. I'm hearing you say that the way we were parented is showing up for us as adults.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking automatically, like, how do we break those cycles then? Like if we think about children now, like if you're a parent or you're an educator working with young children now, the way we respond to them, whether it is the ignore or whether we get angry because they're not listening, because they're having the meltdown, or we can, it's challenging, I know, but, respond in that calm way that actually sees children and hears children and acknowledges what they're feeling, but still sets a beautiful, healthy boundary. What are the implications then? Like now for that child, what's going to be going on for those children in those different scenarios now? But then also, what is that? How is it going to shape them as human beings as they continue to grow throughout their childhood, but even into adolescence, into adulthood, whether or not they have children of their own? Like, I'm just hearing that this has a flow-on effect. This isn't just, right here and now, how do I get this child to behave?
Yeah.
This is actually having huge implications, right?
Absolutely. So the first thing I want to say is that I really do believe humans are doing the best they can with what they have at the time. And so our parents were parenting us with the information they got at the time, perhaps the way they were parented, what society and culture was telling you to do. So I never have blame on any generation. I think we have to honor the generations that have come before us, because of their sacrifices and what they've done that's allowed us to be here and where we are. So one of the important pieces is not to kind of look at our parents and go, you never listened to my feelings, or you never encouraged me, or, we can have a lot of those feelings come up, which are important to own and feel, but they're not, the job is not to take them to the parents and say, you messed up, right? It's our interpretation and our data to be able to be curious about what's there for us. So I think the first thing we have to be, curious about is, I talk about it in a term such as imprints, which is that we all have imprints around every part of our life. So from little babies, the moment we are born and we are watching how life happens. So if we grow up in an environment where a way of communicating is to yell at each other, we believe that's normal. We go, right, well, if you want someone's attention, then you yell. If we grew up in an environment that when we cried as a little person, our parents were like, don't be so stupid, stop your crying, and crying's for sissies, or just you were mocked when you're crying, then the imprint you receive is feeling my feelings is not okay. So in order to survive, because it's all about survival when we're little, we learn it's not all right to have my feelings. So we look for a way to numb those feelings or to suppress them so we can't have them. And that becomes our map of the world. So we have imprints on everything. We can have amazing imprints, right? Perhaps we grew up in a family where our parents really valued helping others, and we grew up watching our parents look after people in need or gift things, or they were really charitable. That's a beautiful imprint, that we have, that we go, this is how we take care of people. Or I often talk about perhaps we grew up in a family that really valued getting together and eating and sharing a meal, and food was such a beautiful sense of celebration. Everyone would come together, they would laugh, they would eat. It was something really beautiful. Equally, you could have grown up in an environment where you had to sit at the table and you weren't allowed to leave until you finished all your food, and you got yelled and shamed at, and food became a source of great stress for you. So we have imprints on everything. We watch our parents right from the beginning, how they interact with each other, and that's forming our identity around what relationships look like. So we see lots of tenderness between our parents. We go, okay, so you're really tender and kind to each other, and relationships are respectful. Equally, we see our parents belittle each other. We go, oh yeah, that's what you do in relationships. So we're like a little sponge, and then we just have all these imprints that land on top of us. And often they are deeply subconscious. We don't even realize what we're doing, but we take those stories and imprint out into the world, and then we keep looking for evidence for them to be true. So if we grew up with a story that we were often told as a kid, you're too loud, or you're too much, like, it's, stop it, like you're too dramatic, then we have that as our imprint. And then perhaps we grow up to be a teenager and, we're naturally flamboyant and we say something and then someone kind of scoffs and goes, oh, you're over the top. And then we go, there's more evidence. I'm too over the top. It's not okay for me to be who I am, right? We constantly look for the evidence to reinforce the imprints that we have there. And so then we become parents ourselves. And because those imprints are there and they're often unconscious, we usually just repeat the patterns and we continue on, and our children come along and ideally they push back at us and they'd be like, here's a bit for you and here's a bit there. And if we have the awareness, we stop and we go, whoa, how does this feel for me? And what is my story and my connection to this belief system, this imprint? And then the most important question is, what do the imprints I want for my children to be? And, one of the courses that I run, it's like an 8-week immersion course. It helps us take everybody through each week through some of the core imprints that we have that shape how we parent. So we talk about trust, we talk about big feelings, we talk about our relationship to self-care, to boundaries, to play, to some of the biggest things that turn up in parenting. And what I do is I get people to really reflect and unpack what was modeled to you, what was the message in your house, what is your imprint now, and what is it that you believe that you're modeling to your kids, and does that feel good? And that is where I think we begin to go, okay, I want to change some of this. And so the first step is just being curious. The first step is like going, wow, if this was a book, how would it read? Right? It would read like, this is the story and this is how it went. And so the first thing we do is we start to get curious of, wow, that is why I do what I do. It's not right. It's not wrong. It just is. And then we get to ask ourselves a question, and is that what I want to do moving forward? And is that what I want my children to do? And so I think the first piece is really that beautiful inquiry of looking at where we grew up, what we were modeled, what we've believed to be true, and then really choosing, does that serve me? And do I like that? And what do I want moving forward? And then we can actually work with it. And so sometimes we have to dig a bit deeper to why those imprints are there. Sometimes we have a loyalty to those imprints, even though we don't want to do it, but we have a loyalty to it because that's what our family does. I see this a lot. If we grew up in a family where there was perhaps a struggle financially in our family, and, even though we're like, oh, I don't want it to be like that, then if we started to earn money, we can actually feel a lot of shame around earning money. We can actually hide it because we feel like we'll be betraying our family because our family struggles together. So we often have loyalties to our imprints, and then that can feel also, really tricky to shift and change. So sometimes we have to dig a bit deeper and see what the story is. And then we can have some tools that help us to shift and move what those stories are. And I think the bigger impact of this is that as we understand our stories, as we start to work with, well, what do I want my imprint to be and what would I want this to look like? And then we start taking little steps towards changing that belief system, or actually some actions to make it move. We then begin to be conscious around what we're passing on to our children. And then where we see it, our children begin to take that on board and as I say, learn to speak a different language. And now the impact of this, and this is why I think parents these days are, they're really courageous, because I think this generation of parents are the ones that are really starting to do the work, because we have access to information in a way that our parents didn't. There's a lot of science that backs up what I'm talking about now, that we begin to go, yeah, wow, what happens to us impacts who we are in the world. Obviously, we understand trauma more in a deeper way. So what we're seeing now is an ability to start working through some of this big, powerful stuff and change the generational patterns that have been there for a long time. But it takes a lot of courage, and it can feel really messy and sticky as we do it. But the trade-off is our children then get to move forward with less baggage, hopefully, but also with a greater, deeper emotional awareness, which we know is what our planet needs and what's going to change it. And, I think having done this work for a long time now, and I guess using my children as my test cases, doing all the work with them. Well, I was kind of forced to. I don't think you can do this without having to do the work yourself. I really watch particularly around emotional awareness of what it is to raise my kids with the imprint that I wanted for them, which is all of your feelings are welcome. And our job is to help you find healthy ways to express your feelings. So it is okay to be angry. It is not okay to hit your sister. but anger is not bad, right? And I'm going to help you find healthy ways to move that anger through your body if it's there. And crying is beautiful. It is a natural healing mechanism that we all have. And I welcome your tears. Now, none of that was given to me when I was raised. My parents did the best they could. But as I started to unpack the places where I never felt that it was okay to have healthy anger and where I never was able to express myself, as I did more of that work, I had more spaciousness to meet my children in that space. And so from when they were little, when they did get angry and upset, I would hold space for their feelings. And then as they did that, that became an imprint that my feelings are normal. So then as they grew, whenever they got upset, they would come and say, I just need to cry, or I feel really angry. Can we get the boxing gloves out? I need to move this from my body. And I'd be like, yes. And now I guess what I see is they are young adults. And, I love this, that all three of my children work with children. Two of them are disability support workers, so they work with neurodivergent children. One of them works at my school as an assistant guide. She works with the little kids and holds space for their feelings all day, right? She does an amazing job. And what I have witnessed with them is their ability to be with feelings is so relaxed and so easy because they've experienced that themselves. They have an embodied sense of what it feels like to be heard. And so they bring that to the children they work with. And I often see the ease in which it sits there for them. And this, I really do believe, is how we change the future, how we change these patterns, these bigger generations, because the more that we do that, the more we hold those spaces for our children to know that all of them is welcome and to process their feelings in healthy ways, then what happens is they develop such a deep sense of connection with themselves. And when we have a deep sense of connection with ourselves, we don't want to go and hurt other people. We don't want to destroy the planet. We don't want to do spiteful things. We come back to the place of humanity within us and then with everybody else. And for me, I think that is the goal here, right? We want to raise these children who are connected to themselves and each other so that they take care of this world that we're living in.
Well, that's so beautiful. I couldn't agree more. And I think often, I guess, even from an education perspective, which is where the work that I do sits, we don't talk about feelings enough. It's about getting a good mark on ATAR as opposed to actually what you're talking about is a really different value system and philosophy for actually being a human being, whether it's through that journey of who you are in your family, but also there is an impact that school obviously has and children and our young people spend so much time in school. But what you're talking about is actually a way that we can grow connected human beings who are passionate and,
Yes.
connected to themselves so that they can connect to each other. And you don't have to look far to see really, I guess, relationships that are falling apart and that are toxic or damaging, whether it's on social media and in the digital space or even when it's happening in our communities. It is really, I think, disheartening to see that. And I love that you're talking about, relationships first and foremost, like for us as adults to have a better sense of who we are and that impact that not only has on our own lives, but then hold space for our children and young people to talk about emotions and feelings so that they learn that it's okay to have feelings, and what you've described as you've witnessed your own children growing older and make space for other people. You can just see the flow and effect that's not just having on one person's life, but on our communities and the way that we show up as human beings to care for each other and care for the planet. Like it's just huge, right? Like,
I believe it is, to me, I go, how are we going to change a lot of what's going on in our world? Well, it starts in the family. It starts from when our kiddos are little, tiny babies, how we take care of the mothers, when they've had their babies, how we hold the family unit, so that they feel supported, so that we resource the family unit so that they're not stressed, so that they have more capacity to connect with children, because we know connection, attachment, attunement is so vital. I mean, this in the early years, right? It is everything. And how do we support our family units so that we don't see a lot of the stuff that we have? We have a massive mental health crisis at the moment, massive across the board. And for me, I think it's a bigger infrastructure problem, but it's the lack of connection. And I think also because we have a lack of connection to ourselves, it's harder to then bring that to our children.
Yeah, absolutely. Lael, led you to do this work?
I think probably my children, really. I mean, before I did what I did now, I worked in birth for a very long time. So I used to be actually, even before that, the first company, I mean, I actually don't usually talk about this, but I'm like, this is actually relevant because you know how nothing's wasted. The first company I ever started when I was 20 was a children's entertainment company. And this was way back when like the Wiggles were starting, right? That's how old I am. And I wanted to be a performer, but I didn't feel thick-skinned enough to keep going to auditions and getting rejected. So I just was like, how do I create my own work where I can get paid and perform? And I was like, oh, I'll start my own business. I mean, just I love the naivety of 20-year-old Lael who's like, I'll just do my own thing. I love that in young people that you're just so like, whatever. Like I probably wouldn't do it now, but I'm like, whatever. So I had a children's entertainment company for about 7 years where I used to dress up as fairies and mermaids and all sorts of stuff and entertain kids. And then we'd put on these big shows and pantomimes. And it taught me a lot about play. It taught me so much about play, connection, finding how to connect with children. Like, I mean, I didn't know that that's what I was doing at the time, but gosh, it was a beautiful apprenticeship to learn how to do that. And through when I had that company, I had my first child when I was quite young. I was 25 when I had Kai. And so, you know, that was a shock. And, you know, being a young mum. And I mean, I think first time parenting is hard no matter what age you are, but it was hard being young and still running this business. And it was a really tricky time. And I had a really challenging birth experience with him. And then when I got pregnant a few years later and had my daughter, I knew I had to do it differently. And I had a really powerful birth with her that felt incredibly healing. And it just opened or unlocked something in me that I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to help families have a positive experience. I knew what traumatic birth felt like and I wanted to help them have a positive one. So I became a childbirth educator. I learned the calm birth program and started teaching calm birth. And I worked as a doula for a long time, so I would attend births. So I got to see lots of little bubbas come into the world. And my goodness, that was just the most fascinating training again for knowing how to hold space when things were tricky, especially being in birth, when women were working really hard and things were feeling tricky and there was lots of feelings and emotions, and being able to hold space for them was really amazing and powerful and intense and all the things. So I worked in birth for a long time, and then the birth kind of element then moved more into particularly that postnatal trauma space, because I kept seeing there was so much trauma within birth. So I started doing counselling with families that had had traumatic birth experiences. And then I had my third child and I had a really big journey with her. And then that led me to something called Aware Parenting, which is the work of Dr. Aletha Salter, which was really about how we help babies and children heal from trauma as well, which was more about listening to feelings and holding space. And that just opened up a whole world for me, because I'd had my own trauma that I had to work with. So I then had to dive deep into everything I was learning personally. And I ended up taking like nearly 2 and a bit years off work because I was right in the middle of my own kind of healing journey and had to do the work. And I had 3 kids and, you know, I was doing all of that. But as I came out the other side, I then moved more into working with groups of people and workshops and people wanting to know more and working one-on-one and just did thousands of hours of listening to people's stories. And I think there is something so powerful about listening and holding space for people, which teaches you a hell of a lot. And so I did that for many years. And then I think as my kids grew, my son then, when he started to become a teenager, somehow randomly, it's not randomly, I just think life always takes you where you need to go. I ended up then teaching sex education to teenagers, which was a random thing. But I ended up going to the school one day. He was in like year 8 or year 9 or something. And the coordinator knew I was a birth educator. And he said, can you come and talk to the kids about birth? And I was like, yeah, no worries. And then as I was walking out, I just said to him, are you talking to the kids about pornography and consent? He's like, no, we're not. And I was like, you need to be. Like, this is really important. I mean, this is many years ago. This is like 10 years ago now. And he's like, do you want to come and talk to them about it? And I was like, yes. And so then all of a sudden I just created this program that I was like, what would 14-year-old me want to know? And what do I want my son to know? And so then I just started teaching sex ed, and then other schools kept hearing about it. And then before I knew it, I was teaching sex ed in secondary schools all over Victoria, which was so good because I loved working with teenagers. And again, I learned so much by sitting in those spaces with them, listening to their thoughts, their beliefs and where it's at, and really trying to give them the education that I thought I desperately wanted to know when I was a teenager, that no one ever talked about. No one ever talked about pleasure. No one ever talked about consent. No one ever talked about how we have awkward conversations. And so I then kind of did that for a while. And then from there, I then ended up, the opportunity came to build a school, which was through another client of mine when she approached me and just said, let's make a school. And that was the last thing I ever had in my mind. If you had told me 10 years ago I'd build a school, I'd be like, don't be ridiculous. Like, I often joke, I didn't even like education. I didn't love going to school. My kids certainly didn't love it. So here's me going, do I end up creating a school? But I really trusted, it was an opportunity to create something new and different and bring everything that I had learned through the lens of trauma, through the lens of connection, attachment, how we help children thrive, healing, and bring that into an education sense. And so we really looked at, how do we build something where it's the child first, not, as you say, the data, not even the learning, but coming through that philosophy. It's very hard for children to learn if they don't feel safe in their bodies, if they don't feel safe in their environments. So how do we put safety first, emotional safety first? How do we create environments where children can relax? Like there's not this threat of always getting in trouble. I mean, we absolutely have boundaries and we have rules and ways that things work, like any school or like any place where there's a group of people. But how do we do it without that punitive element, where we're not shaming, where we're not using punishments and rewards? How do we do it in a different way? So yeah, that's I spent 3 years of my life kind of creating Woodline, and then, that opened. And, I think every step of the way has come because I think opportunities have come to me, or there's been a need to create something new. And I'm a big believer of just jump in and figure it out. Like, I'm like, okay, yeah, that sounds all right. Let's do that. Let's see what happens. Yeah. I mean, my husband these days, I'm like, I've got this idea. And he's like, what? It's like, Lael. I'm like, no. Like, I remember when I'd finished writing this book, which is coming out next year. And I'd literally just finished it the day before. And then we were driving somewhere and I said to him, so I was just thinking, and he goes, Lael, you just finished your book. Like, just pause on that for a minute. I was like, no, I've done that. I'm ready for the next thing now. So I love to respond to what life is bringing me, and to, I think, where I see a need for deeper connection, and in a way that we can help people have information that can help them understand themselves more and that can influence where we are on this planet. So I think the reason that I do what I do is probably because I want to help humans, but also I really want children to be understood. And I really want these beautiful little people to be treated in the way that they deserve to be treated. That's, I think, what really fuels me, is to be an advocate for them in the world.
What a beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I literally have goosebumps. Wow, that's so profound. And there's so much there. It's incredible. What really stood out for me listening to you was that you are someone that seizes opportunity, like that notices there's an opportunity here. Not like, even when you're talking about, shifting into sex ed, not just going, no, I just do this, but actually going, oh, here's an opportunity, and here's a way that I can actually bring something and make a difference. But I can also hear, as you're explaining this, like you're responding to, I guess, a need and an opportunity. But then at the end, you really summed it up that it was because that you've got this clear, I think, purpose. And you can actually see it's not just any opportunity, but it's an opportunity to create connection. It's an opportunity to actually help people, to support people. Can you tell me more about that? Like, I'm thinking, and I'm kind of at a very high level looking at your journey and going, you are an incredible leader. What comes to mind is just so much courage, to take into those opportunities.
Yeah.
Have you always had that courage? Is it just your personality trait, or is it something that you've kind of had to work through?
I do feel that I've always been the type of person to go, oh yeah, let's give it a go and see what happens. I'm not afraid to take a risk. And my theory is this: you'll learn something regardless, whether it works or whether it doesn't. I'm going to learn something, so we may as well give it a go. So I think, talking about imprints, my mother was a really courageous woman who would often do things out of her comfort zone to, better understand herself, to step out into the world, all those kind of things. So that was modeled for me. And I also, the other imprint I had was from my dad, who just said, follow your heart. There'll always be a way to do something. There's always a way to make money. There's always a way to do something. Like, go do what you love. So I had these beautiful role models or imprinting around anything is possible. Like, go find it, go figure out. And, I say to people all the time, I am not formally educated. I mean, I've finished year 12, but I don't have a university degree. I didn't do anything like I followed my path, and I know that the way that I learn best is by doing. It's not by reading books and, which I still do love, but I learn best by sitting in the moment. What's real life data? What am I seeing? What am I learning? It's doing something enough and as many times that you begin to then master that. Now, I know that's not for everybody, but for me, I know that that's how I learn best, which is by doing. So I think because of that, I'm not afraid to throw myself into something and go, well, let's see. I'm also a massive fan of doing the apprenticeship. So whenever I did something new, I was like, all right, who's done this before me and who's doing it well? And can I go speak to them? And can I shadow them? And can I ask them to mentor me? Or can I ask them to show me how they've done it? Like, I love watching people and watching people who do stuff well and go, yeah, okay, that works, that doesn't, what feels good? So in anything I've done, I've kind of found these beautiful teachers who have, walked before me, and I've been like, show me everything you know. Like, I want to come and learn from you and from your wisdom. And I think that that's what's been a beautiful guide for me as well. So I think the thing I often want to say to people is we are all different. And I know this about me. I know that I am courageous, and sometimes I have no idea how I'm going to do something, but I'll figure it out. And so I just jump in and just do it. And that's me. Now, I know for other people that sounds terrifying, and they have to tick all the boxes and do the spreadsheets and do anything before they do it. And there's a place for that as well. It's not right or wrong. It's just different. And I think I've realized now, having my own companies for 30, like I've been in business for 30 years now, that I'm like, I know how I work best. I know how to make something and put it out there in the world and see how it goes. And I still have wobbles and doubts, like, this new book that's coming out. Just yesterday, I was like, I don't know if it's any good. To my husband, I don't know. He's like, Lael, come on. And I was like, I don't know. You still have the doubts, but I go do it anyway. So, I had my day yesterday where I'm like, I don't know. And, people just telling me it's good to be nice, and I don't know. And then I'm like, we'll do it anyway, because whatever happens, you'll learn something from it. So there's nothing to lose. And I also really do believe in it takes courage to step out of your comfort zone and do something new. So no matter how it lands, you've won anyway, because you were courageous enough to say yes. So it actually doesn't matter whether it's a success or not. You've created something, and that's magnificent. So, I kind of live by that mantra as well.
It's such a great attitude to have, like such a good outlook, to have that courage and to know that you're going to learn something from the experience. But I also love that you have been so proactive in actually reaching out to others and learning from them. I think this, when I think about leadership, and this is really what we're talking about, is you are a leader. You're a courageous leader who's willing to step into a new opportunity, even when you don't have it figured out yet, right? And but you're willing to learn. And I think, we still have so many leaders and so many, I guess, old kind of mental models of leadership that you can't be a leader unless you've got it all figured out or you've got all the answers. But in actual fact, being brave to just take the next step creates so many opportunities to learn. And I think we need more leaders who are willing to learn from other people, right?
Well, I think if we sit in a place where we go, well, I've mastered it and there's nothing to learn, then we're going to come undone, because we are constantly learning, like life. I'm sure that when I'm in my 80s and 90s, I'll still be like, oh, that's interesting. What did that mean for me? Like, I think we are here to constantly grow and learn if we're willing to. And I think that everything is an opportunity for growth. And I think, we can box ourselves in, or we can limit the possibility and the potential if we don't open ourselves up to constantly growing and learning and expanding within it. So I think we all need a person. We all need a person. Like, I do really great stuff in the world, and I know a lot of stuff, and I support and mentor lots of people, but I have a person that I go to and go, I am so in my stuff here. I cannot see my way out. Like, can you help me here? Like, I need someone to reflect back to me. I need someone to go, what do you think's going on for you here? So I think we all need a person or people to help us see our blind spots, because we're pretty good at having blind spots and protecting ourselves and making everyone else wrong. I think we're pretty good at that.
True. So
Yeah.
true. And I'm thinking, you mentioned before, like even yesterday, you were having some of the self-doubt creeping. It just goes to show, like, we're all human beings, right? Like, well, maybe if we're a narcissist, it's a bit different. But, most of us do actually doubt our own capability, or we might doubt what we're putting out into the world.
Yes.
Is this, do your mentors sort of help you with those kind of challenges as well?
Yeah, it's I think when I go to my support network, it is sometimes just it's about seeing bigger than what it is. Like, I think we go, okay, I've hit that milestone, it's amazing, but we all kind of have this glass ceiling that we go, oh no, that's too big, or that's too much, or that's too much money, or but what if I expand in this way? I think we can all, and again, a lot to do with our imprints. Our culture and society, particularly here in Australia, does not support people thriving and getting big. We have tall poppy syndrome, which basically is like, well, if you're succeeding, that's just going to mirror back to me that I'm not. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to judge you, right, to make myself feel better. And that's often what we have been taught to do in our culture, instead of celebrating people's incredible courage and success and hard work. We do it in sport, but we don't often do it in many other places. And so I think it's interesting that, we have that as a bit of an imprint, I think, as humans. And for me, I think with my really beautiful people that, that I go to sometimes, actually just what I want from them is just to listen to me, but also just to reflect back my humanness, to just be like, yes, you feel like that, and you also can be big, or you also can take this next step, or, what is the story that's coming up for you there? And it's just a gentle holding. That's often just what I need. Like, I do really believe we often all have the wisdom within us. Sometimes we just get in our own way and we can't see it. So I think it's, sometimes I say to myself, if I'm in something, I go, what would I ask a client if I wasn't me right now and I was working with someone? What are the questions I'd ask them? But it's sometimes hard when you're in it. You're entangled in your own story. So, I think that's why we need people to hold space for us to help us see our way out.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? So true, because we're too close to it.
Yeah.
Too close to it. Or, we need those people to help us see the blind spots, because we do have them. Right. What do you think would be your biggest learnings about being a leader or leadership?
It's a good one. I definitely think having Woodline in the last few years has taught me more about leadership than anything, because as you'd be aware, in any institution or system, and there's people, all sorts of different people involved in it, it's big. You have parents, you have educators, you have the children, you have the wider community. There's a lot, and there's a lot of people's feelings, and there's a lot of projections that go on. And when you're also trying to create something new, it's tricky. It's tricky to help people understand your vision as well, and people come with all their own stuff. And so, the last few years has taught me a lot about how I can support the leaders of my school to be able to then do what they need to do. And I think the thing is, what I've really learned about leadership is sometimes we take it so personally. We get so entangled with, but this is about me. And instead of actually going, what's the role that we're doing here, and what's going to serve the bigger picture of this business, this company, this school, this whatever. If we didn't make it personal, we stood back a bit and we could look at what's playing out there, and we look at all the information. What's needed? Does this person need more support here? Do we need to change some of the ways that we do stuff? What have we seen works and what hasn't? When we created Woodline, one of the biggest things we said right from the beginning is all of us are going to have to do a lot of unlearning. If we want to create something new, you have to unlearn the way that it's been done for a long time. So we have to be willing to make mistakes, and we have to be willing to own our mistakes. So a lot of unlearning has come from, we did that didn't work. Or, we tried to make this thing happen and then that was too clunky and it didn't feel good. And so what have we learned from that? And we own that, and how do we move forward? And, sometimes people are very open and they're willing to go on that path with you, and then sometimes they're not, and that's hard, and that's been a challenge as well. And so I often think, especially with a system like a school, and when you're trying to do something a bit differently, it brings its challenges. It absolutely does. And often over the years, I would think about people who made these massive businesses. I'd think about Steve Jobs, or I think about people that had done these really big pioneering things and all the challenges they would have had to bump up against and still hold their vision for what they wanted. And that's hard sometimes when you're kind of getting knocked down a bit or when challenges are happening. Yet I think the way you see them, the challenges, is vital. So I really began to go, okay, this is the contrast. The contrast is this is what we don't want. And what do we want it to look like? We want it to look like this. What would be the greatest feeling if around something that we're wanting here? And I would say that to the leaders at my school. I'd be like, let's talk about it. What do you want it to look like? What do you want it to look like? Like, let's dream what we want it to look like. How do we get there? What is the contrast shown us? That. What do we need to do differently? So I think being open to just keep seeing the contrast. Thank you, that's been a gift. Let's keep moving closer towards what feels in alignment with our vision. And it's not easy at times. Like it's not easy. There's plenty of times where you're like, this feels really hard. I don't want to do this anymore. But then you see the evidence of the beauty and then you go, okay, let's do it. So, it's still a work in progress. I think in 20 years' time, if I go back and visit Woodline, I'll be like, wow, this is wild, right? As sometimes things take time to cement. Sometimes there's so much learning that has to happen around the way you do stuff. So anything new and innovative is often hard. It's really hard. And it's why a lot of businesses don't last past a year or two, because it's really tricky. So you've got to have that grit to be like, okay, how can we do it? And I think the key piece of any leader is the willingness to be vulnerable, the willingness to see the contrast, to not make it personal if possible, to go, what are we learning here? How do we see what we can do to move forward? And have the support around you to actually do it is
Yeah, amazing. You talked about having a vision and bringing people into that. What does it look like, feel like? What is it that we're trying to achieve versus comparing to what we don't want? Is that kind of what motivated you, inspired you to keep going and not give up, when you hit some of those challenges?
Yeah, for sure. Because I think, especially like when I talk about the context of Woodline, I spend a lot of hours dreaming what it would be. Like I spend a lot of time going, how do I want the children to feel? And how do I want the adults to feel? And how do I want the guides and the educators to feel? And, I spent a lot of time dreaming of the vision of what it could be, which came from, I think, is knowing what I didn't want to go, what do I want here, right? So I watched all my 3 kids struggle in the education system, just because, one's an athlete and, he just hated sitting at a desk, and the other one is super creative and needs to connect. And pretty much if they learn anything, they have to talk about it. So then often we get in trouble for talking all the time. And my 3rd child was just like, why am I learning about this? Like, this makes no sense. And I was like, yeah, like just such a truth teller, God. And I watched them all just go, this doesn't feel right for me. And so, I kept thinking, well, what is the place that I would want them to feel held in? And what did I want as a kid? And there's so many stories I've heard of adults around the challenges that they experience. Well, what could that look like if we created something different? And so I think that has been a big part of, keeping on going when it's tricky. To be like, I know in my bones that this is a beautiful offering in the world. And I know that as we are learning and growing, and there's no perfect in schools, right? This is utopia. It doesn't exist. But I know that as we keep working towards refining and getting closer to, I think we've always held our vision, but I think just we're learning the parts along the way. I just knew in my bones that it would work, and it does. There's a lot of evidence there of the beauty of how it works really well. And my hope is that other people will come and see what we do, and we collect enough data over the years to go, hey, this is what we see, because it's really about helping children to get through primary school, to come out the other end with such a strong sense of themselves that they're ready to then step into that adolescent phase, feeling connected, grounded. That's what we want, right? And they have a strong sense of knowing how to learn. They're really excited learners. They know how they learn best. They also understand emotional awareness, intelligence, in interactions and relationships. Like, that's what we want. I think that's what the world needs. The world doesn't need more kids that are just wrote information back at someone. We want them to be creative thinkers. We want them to question stuff. We want them to to tap into that beautiful creativity and curiosity, which is where innovation comes from. So how do we support that for them to be able to come that? So, that's always been the goal. And I think we get closer to it. And I hope, again, we collect enough data over the years to say, this is what's possible. And other people go, yeah, hey, we might copy some parts of that. And, that's what I would love. I would love for there to be alternatives, so that it can support children as we grow. I don't believe that we are the answer. I think we're one answer. I think there's lots of different things that are out there that's going to support just the changing world and our changing systems. And that is exciting to be part of something like that. And it also has not been easy. And, there's critics. It's like anything new. There's critics, which is fine, and I've had to over the years just go, you know what? You build a school, you do it, and then come and tell me what you think, right? Then we'll have a conversation. But until you've done it and you've had to work with all the moving pieces, you kind of just have to block it out to go, okay, keep going, keep doing what we're doing. And I feel that for anybody who does something new and innovative. I just think people who are courageous enough to do it, I'm like, I take my hat off to you, because you're taking a risk and you're also trying to do something new. And classically as humans, we judge what we're unsure of. We will stick to stuff that we know, even if we don't like it, because at least we know it. So I just think anyone that is brave enough to take a risk and try something new, it may not work the first time, may not work the fifth time, but you are living and you are trying and creating. And I'll be standing in the ring, clapping hard for you, right? No matter what it is, because I'm I know how hard it is. I know it. And I really do champion people who take risks, are creative, are just going, yeah, I'm going to give it a go.
That's so beautiful. What a beautiful mission that you have for Woodline School. It is so remarkable. It's so profound. And I think, that clearly is what drives you to keep going, right? To ignore the naysayers, to push through the challenges, because, it's worth it, right? Making a difference to these children and young people to come out the end of primary school with a strong sense of creativity and identity and know who they are. That's so important. And I love that you've, thrown in some advice too around being courageous and, being a cheerleader for the people who are courageous, because it is hard to do something different, particularly as you said, we are living in a society that just likes the same. Interrupting the status quo is hard to do.
Yeah. But I think that the irony of us as humans is we like to judge what's there, then we won't do anything to change it. And we're just so much more comfortable sitting there judging it. And I'm like, okay, you don't like it? Make a change, advocate for something, do something new. But we're all pretty good because we've been pretty much conditioned to just sit there and judge what's there. And we do that. We're all judgmental humans. But I think it's, I've learned over the years from a leadership point of view too, that it's usually the people that are out there putting themselves on the line are the ones that are the least judgmental. They are the ones that are not tearing each other down. They're not the ones that are criticizing, because they're just they're busy doing and championing others, and I think that's vital. I have one beautiful friend who's an amazing businesswoman, and we voice note each other maybe every day. And we just champion each other. That's our job with each other. We bring the hard stuff to our voice notes and the good stuff. But she is my success is her success and her success is my success. And we just constantly are you've got this. Here is, this, what you are doing is important for the world. And, we all need that. We need a cheerleader in our corner for sure. And, I value that relationship so much, because I know that she knows how hard it is being brave and courageous and putting it out there. And sometimes it feels lonely doing that. So we need somebody in our corner.
Yeah, that's so true. Do you have any last pieces of advice or wisdom to share with anyone listening, whether they're a parent or an educator or a leader, or just wanting to do something and make a difference to the world?
Yeah. I think for me, the thing that I keep coming back to is when we know our own story, so we understand more about why we do what we do, that is one of the most powerful bits of information that we can have. When we can know ourselves well and understand ourselves well, then we have the opportunity to, when stuff goes on, and get curious as to why it's there. And then we can actually respond instead of react. And that's like a superpower, because I think what I see these days is we are all about our perception and our projection, which means whether it's your mother-in-law, whether it's your kids, whether it's a work colleague, when something goes on and we have a reaction, we make it mean what we make it mean, and then we project it onto that person. And they're wrong, or they're this, or they're that, or all the things. And actually, I think the power sits in being able to take a moment and go, oh, I'm having a reaction. What is that about? If my boundary's been crossed, does that make me feel like I'm not good enough right now? Or, is that just reflecting to me that I really actually need a break and I need to set a limit and take some time for myself? When we can pause and be curious, then we are able to transform what is there and then move forward. But when we take that reaction and then we throw it on everybody else, then that's where we create often dysfunction and chaos, and we push up against each other. And I'm not saying don't have boundaries and all those things. Like, it's important, there's a balance. But the first step is 100% our reflection of what is here for me right now. And I think if you can play that game and catch that and be curious about it, then you are going to move through life with a lot more grace and ease.
That's so beautiful. That self-awareness piece, right? And it takes us full circle right back to where we started with our conversation today. Lael, thank you for sharing your story, your experience, and also your beautiful wisdom. I've learned so much from you. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I know everyone listening will as well. Thank you for your time. It's so precious.
You're so welcome. Thanks, Amie.